No nannies lasted with the billionaire's one-legged son, until a new black maid did the unthinkable. Sarah Collins never planned to end up in a billionaire's mansion. She had once dreamed of wearing a white coat, walking hospital corridors, and helping children heal. But life had a cruel way of twisting dreams. When her mother fell sick and the bills piled up, Sarah dropped out of her medical program and took whatever work she could find. Housekeeping wasn't her calling, it was survival. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity, doing her job with care and attention that few noticed. When the offer came from the Moore estate, she almost said no. The pay was generous, suspiciously generous. The agency told her the last 17 nannies had either quit or been dismissed. "It's not the work," the woman on the phone said softly. "It's the boy." But Sarah needed the job. Her rent was due, and her mother's medication wasn't going to pay for itself. The Moore estate sat on 20 acres of manicured perfection, overlooking the Pacific. Glass walls, silver railings, and marble floors gleamed like a museum of wealth. Yet, beneath its polish, there was something hollow, a silence too heavy for a place so grand. Sarah felt it the moment she stepped inside. The staff barely spoke above whispers, eyes darting toward the upper hallway whenever a sound came from there. That was where he lived. Liam Moore, 9 years old, the billionaire's only son. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share a word of love in the comments. The rumors about him ran wild, that he screamed at night, broke expensive things on purpose, and even attacked one of the nannies. The official explanation was simple: trauma. He'd lost his mother in a plane crash and his leg in a car accident months later. But gossip twisted grief into fear. People said the boy was cursed, that no one could handle his rage. Sarah didn't believe in curses. She believed in pain, and in what happens when no one listens to it. On her first morning, she met Mr. Ethan Moore only briefly. He was polite, distant, and intimidating in the way only men of immense power could be. His voice was calm, but his eyes were heavy, the eyes of someone who hadn't known rest in years. Behind him, portraits of his late wife lined the hall. Beautiful, smiling faces of a woman long gone but still haunting every corner of the house. "Just do your job," he said simply. "Don't try to fix what can't be fixed." Sarah nodded, though the words lingered like a warning. Days passed in quiet routine. She cleaned rooms that were already spotless, folded towels that no one used, and polished silver that never left the cabinets. But the east hallway, the one that led to Liam's room, always seemed colder. Sometimes, she'd hear faint noises, muffled sobs, the dull thud of something hitting the floor. The other staff avoided that side altogether. "Stay away if you can," whispered one of the cooks. "The boy doesn't like strangers." Still, Sarah couldn't shake her curiosity. There was something deeply human in those sounds. Not anger, but pain. The kind that echoes when a child is trapped in silence. Then came the moment that changed everything. One afternoon, while dusting the upper corridor, Sarah heard it again, that faint, trembling sound. A cry, barely audible, yet filled with exhaustion. She froze. The sound came from behind a half-closed door. Against her better judgment, she pushed it open. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating a room too big for a child. Toys scattered across the floor, untouched. Books lay open on the bed, their pages wrinkled by tears. And there, sitting at the edge of the mattress, was Liam. He wasn't the monster she'd heard about. He was just a boy, pale, fragile, trembling. His prosthetic leg lay discarded on the carpet. His small hands were trembling as he pressed a towel against his skin, raw and bleeding where the artificial limb should have been. Sarah's heart clenched. Years of medical training, half-finished but never forgotten, surged back. She recognized infection, pressure sores, and the unmistakable signs of neglect. This wasn't misbehavior. It was pain. Before she could speak, A deep voice filled the doorway. Ethan Moore stood there, frozen in shock. His gaze moved from Sarah to his son, and for a moment his confidence was shattered. No one had ever seen him like that, unsure and shaken. Sarah didn't flinch. She gently moved closer to Liam, her tone steady, her actions careful. She cleaned the wound with calm precision, her movements full of compassion. Ethan watched in silence, unable to look away. It was the first time anyone had touched Liam with such care in years. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The image of the boy haunted her. How many people had come through that mansion, seen his pain, and walked away? How many had chosen comfort over courage? The next morning, Ethan requested to see her. His tone was different now, curious, almost hopeful. He wanted to understand how she'd managed to calm his son when 17 others had failed. Sarah hesitated but told him the truth. "Because I listened." Something in those words unsettled him. For the first time in years, Ethan Moore, a man who commanded industries and controlled empires, realized he might not truly know his own child. And deep within the walls of that mansion, something began to shift. Sarah didn't know it yet, but the truth she had just stepped into would expose a web of greed, neglect, and racial bias that reached far beyond one broken family. The silence of the Moore estate was about to be shattered, not by screams, but by truth. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's quiet presence began to ripple through the cold halls of the Moore estate. Liam, once feared and pitted, started to respond to her in small, unexpected ways. He no longer slammed his door or screamed at the nurses. He ate his meals quietly and even asked Sarah to read to him while he rested. The staff noticed it first, the faint hum of laughter drifting down the east hallway, something the mansion hadn't heard in years. But not everyone was pleased. Behind those polished walls, status mattered more than sincerity. And Sarah, a black maid among wealthy white staff, was an anomaly that unsettled them. Whispers followed her down the hallways, subtle at first, but sharp enough to cut. "She's getting too close," one housekeeper muttered. "You know how these people are," said another, voice dipped in condescension. Sarah ignored them, but every word stung like salt in an open wound. She had grown up knowing what it felt like to be underestimated, to be looked at and already judged. Still, she kept her head high. What mattered was Liam. But something about his condition didn't sit right. His prosthetic leg wasn't just uncomfortable, it was wrong. She'd seen hundreds of prosthetics during her medical training. This one didn't fit a child's frame. The alignment was off, the socket edges sharp enough to wound. Each step must have been torture. When she approached Ethan about it, his expression shifted. Confusion first, then disbelief, and finally guilt. "It was made by the best," he said. "Dr. Adrian Blake, the top specialist in Los Angeles. He personally oversaw the fitting." Sarah wanted to believe that, but her instincts screamed otherwise. Later that evening, while tidying Ethan's study, she found a folder half-buried beneath business papers, medical reports, invoices, and communication from Dr. Blake's clinic. She skimmed through the notes, her hands trembling. Every document repeated the same dismissive phrase: adjustment pain, normal for recovery. Yet, nowhere did it mention reevaluation or proper measurement updates. She knew then, something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Sarah called an old friend, Dr. Emily Hart, her mentor from her abandoned medical program. Emily now runs a small pediatric prosthetics clinic in San Diego. Sarah described Liam's symptoms in detail, careful not to reveal the family's name. There was silence on the line for a long time. Then Emily whispered, "Sarah, I think I know whose work that is. Blake's been under investigation for months. There are rumors he's been cutting corners, using defective fittings so patients keep coming back for replacements. It's criminal." Sarah's stomach twisted. It wasn't just neglect, it was exploitation. A child was suffering because someone valued money more than life. But revealing the truth would not be easy. When she tried to tell Ethan, his tone hardened. He wasn't angry at her, he was terrified. "Do you have any idea what an accusation like that could do?" he said, pacing the room. "I've invested millions in Blake's company. If this gets out, it could destroy—" He stopped mid-sentence. The words hung heavy in the air. Destroy what? His reputation? His wealth? Or the illusion that his money had bought his son's healing? Sarah's voice was steady. "Your son is already being destroyed." Ethan said nothing. But that night, for the first time, he entered Liam's room and stayed there for hours. The next morning he looked different, older, quieter. "We'll go see your friend," he said simply. It was the start of something neither of them could undo. They drove to San Diego under the guise of a private medical checkup. The Moore estate chauffeur wasn't told why. When they arrived at Dr. Hart's clinic, Sarah felt the contrast immediately. There were no polished marble floors, no expensive art, just children laughing, walls covered with crayon drawings, and nurses who knelt to meet kids at eye level. Liam seemed lighter there, as if the air itself was kinder. Dr. Hart examined the prosthetic carefully, then sighed. The kind of sigh that carried both anger and sorrow. "It's all wrong," she said softly. "Completely misaligned. Whoever built this knew it wouldn't fit. It's a deliberate design flaw." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. His face went pale. The billionaire who had built empires suddenly looked powerless. Sarah watched him as the realization sank in. This wasn't just about money or negligence, it was about injustice. A wealthy white doctor exploiting children's suffering, hiding behind credentials and privilege, and a black maid dismissed as help, had been the only one who cared enough to look closer. When they returned home, Ethan's fury turned to resolve. He contacted lawyers, investigators, and state medical boards. But word spread fast, and not everyone supported him. The elite social circles whispered, "The Moores are stirring trouble. She's manipulating him. These people always find a way in." Sarah felt the shift. The staff grew colder, their politeness laced with quiet disdain. Even some of Ethan's business associates hinted that she was overstepping, that a maid's place wasn't to challenge a respected white surgeon. But Sarah stood her ground. Every time she looked at Liam's healing smile, she remembered why she started. And then the backlash hit. Dr. Blake's legal team sent a warning, a veiled threat wrapped in polished language. If Ethan pursued the case, his companies would face reputational risk. Anonymous letters appeared in the mailbox, hinting that Sarah was fabricating everything for money. It was meant to silence her. Instead, it lit a fire. Ethan called the press. He exposed everything, every invoice, every child's record, every name. Within days, other families came forward. 25 in total. Parents whose children had lived in constant agony because they trusted the same doctor. The story exploded. News vans lined the Moore estate gates. Protesters gathered outside Blake's clinic. And through it all, Sarah remained quiet, steady, resolute. She had done what 17 others couldn't. Not because she was stronger, but because she cared enough to listen. But just as the truth began to surface, another threat emerged. One that would test her courage more than ever. Someone wanted her gone. And this time, the danger wasn't coming from the outside world. It was coming from inside the mansion itself. The tension inside the Moore estate grew thick enough to choke on. Cameras flashed outside the iron gates. News anchors called it the scandal that shook Beverly Hills. Yet inside those marble walls, the silence returned. Heavy, suffocating, dangerous. Sarah noticed it first. The staff who once whispered behind her back now stopped speaking entirely when she entered a room. The air changed, the glances sharpened. Something was brewing. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, Ethan called an emergency meeting in his study. He'd received an anonymous message, a recording. Static at first, then a man's voice. Dr. Adrian Blake. Calm, cold, threatening. "Withdraw the complaint," the voice said. "You don't want to lose what's left of your family. That maid of yours should learn when to stay quiet." The message ended with a click. Silence filled the room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Ethan's face drained of color. For the first time, fear replaced fury. He realized this was no longer about legal threats. It was about power, privilege, and how far some men would go to protect their lies. Later that night, the mansion's power went out. The hallways fell into darkness, the rain outside slashing like broken glass against the windows. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and rushed upstairs, her heart pounding. Liam's room. Always her first thought was Liam. When she pushed open the door, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic. Sharp, wrong, out of place. Liam sat on the bed, crying softly. Beside him lay his old prosthetic leg, the defective one. Someone had placed it there deliberately. On the desk, a note written in neat cursive, "Stay in your place." Her blood turned to ice. Ethan stormed in moments later, flashlight shaking in his hand. His rage was volcanic, but his fear was louder. They called the police that night, though deep down they both knew. The people behind this had friends in higher places. The case had crossed a line that money couldn't protect them from anymore. The following days were chaos. News coverage intensified. Blake's lawyers painted Ethan as an unstable father manipulated by a cunning maid. Tabloids twisted Sarah's image into something cruel. Gold-digging housekeeper ruins billionaire's life. The comments online were worse. Anonymous accounts flooded with racist slurs, mocking her, questioning how someone like her had the nerve to challenge a respected white doctor. Sarah tried to stay composed, but each word carved into her like a blade. She wasn't just fighting for Liam anymore. She was fighting a system that wanted her to disappear. Then came the hearing. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, cameras, spectators hungry for scandal. Dr. Blake sat across the aisle, immaculate in a gray suit, his expression smug. Sarah sat behind Ethan, her hands trembling in her lap, clutching a small photograph of Liam smiling in his new prosthetic. The defense opened with venom. They accused Sarah of manipulating the Moors, of falsifying evidence, of projecting her personal resentment of privilege. The words dripped with quiet racism. Not loud, not crude, but polished and poisonous. Each line was a reminder that, in their eyes, she wasn't credible because she was her. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, the courtroom shifted. She stood tall, her voice steady though her heart raced. She spoke of Liam's pain, the wounds, the nights she sat beside him, cleaning blood off his skin. She described the misalignment, the pressure sores, the infection risk, the evidence she'd seen firsthand. And then she paused. Her eyes locked on Blake's. "You said pain was normal," she said softly. "You made children believe suffering was their fault. You profited off their silence. And you thought no one would ever notice because no one ever listens to people like me." The courtroom went still. For a moment, Blake's mask slipped. The arrogance faltered. The prosecution presented documents from other families, medical proof, and finally, the official report from Dr. Hart's clinic confirming Sarah's every claim. The tide shifted. The weight of truth, long buried under wealth and whiteness, began to surface. Outside, protesters held signs that read, "Justice for Liam" and "Stop Blake's scam." The world was watching. The verdict didn't come that day, but something more powerful did. A reckoning. As they left the courthouse, Sarah found herself surrounded by flashing cameras and shouted questions. "Are you seeking money? Is this about revenge? Did you and Mr. Moore have an affair?" She said nothing. She simply took Liam's small hand, looked straight into the lenses, and walked forward. Her silence spoke louder than any headline. That night, Ethan stood by the window of the estate, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time in years. Sarah stood beside him, exhausted but unbroken. The world outside was still cruel, still unfair, but inside that room, something had changed. Ethan turned to her. "They're going to come after us harder," he said quietly. "Are you ready for that?" Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the billionaire, not the employer, but a father finally learning what humility meant. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. But the war wasn't over. The next morning, before dawn, someone set fire to Dr. Hart's small clinic. Flames devoured the children's drawings on the walls, the equipment, the records, everything. When the news reached them, Ethan's hands shook as he read the report. "They're trying to erase the evidence," he whispered. Sarah felt a cold determination settle in her chest. This was no longer just about Liam. This was about every child who had suffered in silence, every family too afraid to speak. The truth was burning, literally, and now she had to decide whether to step back or walk straight into the fire. And as smoke rose in the distance, painting the sky gray, one thought echoed through her mind. If silence protects the powerful, then maybe breaking it is the only real act of justice left. The fire was supposed to destroy everything, the evidence, the truth, the courage that dared to speak against power. But it didn't. It ignited something else instead. In the days that followed, footage of the burning clinic spread across every major news outlet. At first, it was treated like another tragic accident, a malfunction, a short circuit, maybe vandalism. But then came the reports, the missing files. The security footage shows masked figures in suits leaving just before the blaze. The public's patience snapped. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Sarah and Liam anymore. It was about a system that had let men like Dr. Blake thrive while silencing women like Sarah. The outrage was loud, unfiltered, and unstoppable. Protesters marched outside the courthouse, outside hospitals, outside the homes of the people who had funded Blake's empire. Hashtags flooded every social platform. Hashtag Justice for Liam became a rallying cry, not just for one boy's pain, but for every quiet injustice swept under expensive rugs. Ethan, once a man who measured everything in numbers and status, began to understand something he never had before. Privilege wasn't just about what he possessed. It was about what others were denied. He sold off one of his companies and used the money to rebuild Dr. Hart's clinic, bigger, safer, under community ownership. The sign at its front door read, "Free care, equal care, always." Sarah refused the headlines calling her a hero. She didn't feel like one. Her life hadn't suddenly turned perfect. She still faced whispers, judgment, and the weight of knowing that victory in one battle didn't mean the war was over. But something inside her had changed, a quiet certainty that her voice mattered. Liam healed slowly. The nightmares faded. One day, months after the trial ended and Dr. Blake was finally sentenced, not just for fraud but for medical negligence, Liam stood at the clinic's opening ceremony. Cameras pointed toward him, but for once he wasn't afraid. He looked up at the crowd and said, in a voice both shy and strong, "My mom taught me that pain doesn't mean we're weak. It means we're still here." The crowd fell silent. Some cried, some clapped. All listened. That moment was small, but it was everything. Because for the first time, the story wasn't told about them. It was told by them. In the months that followed, families began stepping forward with their own stories. Black nurses, immigrant workers, patients who had been dismissed or misdiagnosed, all finding courage in Sarah's defiance. The spark of one truth had become a fire no one could put out. Yet Sarah knew how fragile change could be. For every step forward, the world seemed to take 2 steps back. She saw it in the news. Another hate crime, another act of violence justified by fear and skin color. But this time she didn't look away. She volunteered at the clinic. She spoke in community forums. She told her story not to be remembered, but to remind others that silence is never neutral. And Ethan, the man who once represented everything she despised, changed too. He became quieter, humbler. He started using his influence differently, funding scholarships for underprivileged students, investing in minority-owned startups, and listening more than he spoke. He and Sarah never called each other friends, but there was a deep, wordless understanding between them, a kind of peace born only from shared struggle. Still, not everyone was happy. Some whispered that Sarah had been lucky. Others said the justice system had made an example out of Blake just to save its image. Maybe both were true. Maybe justice in this world is never pure, only earned through exhaustion and persistence. But even so, something undeniable had shifted. Because every time someone mentioned Liam's story, it forced a conversation that couldn't be ignored. About racism in medicine. About the quiet cruelty of professional discrimination. About how respect, trust, and truth are privileges still unevenly distributed. And in every conversation that began with, "Did you hear about that boy?" there was a seed of change. Years later, Sarah would still visit the rebuilt clinic. She'd sit by the window, watching new children run through the hallways with braces, crutches, and prosthetics that actually fit. She'd watch doctors, black, white, brown, working side by side, and she'd smile. Not because the world had been fixed, but because it was healing. And maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not a finish line, but a beginning. When the final credits of life roll, maybe it's not about the battles we win, but the stories we leave behind, the ones that keep fighting after we can't. Sarah never asked to be a symbol. She only wanted her son to stop hurting. But sometimes that's how revolutions start. Not with speeches or grand gestures, but with a mother who refuses to be silent. And so, if you're watching this, ask yourself, when the system fails someone in front of you, will you stay quiet to stay comfortable? Or will you be the one who breaks the silence? Because in a world where prejudice still wears a smile, where privilege still hides behind policies and titles, silence isn't peace, it's permission. And every voice that dares to rise against it becomes one thing this world can never burn: hope. So share the story. Talk about it. Reflect on it. Because change doesn't begin with power, it begins with empathy. And sometimes, empathy starts with simply listening to the truth, even when it hurts. If this story moved you, if Sarah's courage, Liam's pain, and the truth behind the Moore estate made you feel something, don't let it fade here. Stories like this deserve to be heard, shared, and remembered. Your support helps us bring more real, powerful stories that reveal the hidden sides of injustice and hope. So take a moment, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Because every click keeps these voices alive, and together, we can keep telling the stories that matter most.